The blood on his hands was still warm when he cornered her in the marble hallway. His dark eyes burning with something far more dangerous than the violence he'd just committed. "You belong to me now," Nam Jae-won whispered against her trembling lips. His voice a velvet threat that made Amarachi's entire world tilt on its axis. The Mafia Boss had taken something precious from her tonight, and the terrifying part was how her body betrayed her with every racing heartbeat, responding to the monster who now owned every piece of her shattered innocence. Welcome to Afrokorea TV, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. 3 months earlier, Amarachi had walked into Nam Corporation with nothing but a borrowed suit and desperate hope. The skyscraper pierced Seoul's skyline like a dagger, all glass and steel, and whispered warnings from the security guards who looked at her with something close to pity. She needed this job more than air, her student visa hanging by a thread, her savings account screaming zeros. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like ascending to heaven or hell. She wasn't sure which. The secretary position paid 3 times the normal rate. That should have been her first warning. Her second should have been the way every employee avoided eye contact when she asked about their boss, their faces going carefully blank like they'd practiced the expression in mirrors. But Amarachi was good at ignoring red flags when survival was on the line, so she smiled at the cold-faced HR director and signed papers she barely read. She didn't meet Nam Jae-won until her 3rd day. The man who entered the executive office moved like darkness given form. His tailored black suit fitting his tall frame with devastating precision. Korean features carved from some cruel god's fantasy. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, lips that looked soft until they curved into something predatory. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Obsidian and endless, holding secrets that could swallow a person whole. "You're the new secretary." His voice was deep, accented, dangerous. Not a question. He studied her with an intensity that felt physical. His gaze dragging over her curves in a way that should have been offensive, but instead made heat pool low in her belly. Amarachi had always been self-conscious about her body, the way men looked at her like she was too much, but Jae-won's stare was different. Hungry. Possessive. Like he was cataloging every inch for later use. "Yes, Mr. Nam." She kept her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I've organized your schedule for the weekend. Do you know what I do, Amarachi?" He stepped closer and she caught his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, metallic. Blood, her instincts whispered, but that was crazy. This was a legitimate corporation. "Do you know who I really am?" The next day she learned the truth. A news report played on the breakroom television, talking about a gang war in Gangnam, bodies found in a warehouse, execution style. The reporter mentioned the Nam family in hushed tones, carefully avoiding direct accusations but making implications clear enough. Amarachi's coffee went cold in her hands as she stared at Jae-won's face flashing across the screen. Younger, harder, standing beside a man the reporter identified as his late father, one of Seoul's most notorious crime lords. She should have quit. Should have run back to her tiny apartment and booked the first flight home. But when she returned to the office, Jae-won was waiting, leaning against her desk with his arms crossed and something almost vulnerable flickering in his dark eyes. "Still here," he observed quietly. "Braver or more foolish than the others. I need this job." The truth felt dangerous, but his presence demanded honesty. "I can't afford to be brave." Something shifted in his expression then, a crack in the ice. For just a moment he looked almost human. "Then you'll stay. And Amarachi." His voice dropped to a whisper that raised every hair on her neck. "You'll be safe. Anyone who touches what's mine pays in blood." "What's mine?" The words echoed through her thoughts all evening. She wasn't his, couldn't be his, but the way he said it made her body respond with traitorous heat. She'd never had a boyfriend, had always been too focused on school, on surviving, on being perfect enough to deserve her existence. But something about Jae-won's darkness called to a part of her she didn't recognize. Later that week, she discovered flowers on her desk every morning. Black roses, expensive and strange, with no card, but she knew. The other employees pretended not to notice, but she caught their sideways glances, the fear lurking behind professional smiles. She was being marked, claimed, and everyone could see it except her heart, which stubbornly insisted this was just kindness. A few days later, chaos erupted. A rival gang attempted a hit during a board meeting. Ambw heard gunshots, saw men in masks storming through the executive floor, and before she could scream, Jaewon was there. He moved like violence was an art form, disarming the first attacker with brutal efficiency. His movements so fast they blurred. Blood sprayed across his crisp white shirt as he ended threats with cold precision. He shielded her body with his own when bullets shattered the windows, his hand cradling the back of her head as he dragged her to the floor. "Don't look," he commanded, but she felt everything. His heart pounding against her back, his breath hot on her neck, the way his entire body became a weapon designed to protect her. When silence finally fell, he pulled back to check her for injuries. His hands surprisingly gentle as they roamed over her arms, her face, her trembling shoulders. "Not a scratch," he murmured, something fierce and possessive blazing in his eyes. "Good. I would have burned their entire bloodline to ash if they'd hurt you." That evening, he insisted on driving her home himself. The car was luxury she'd only seen in movies, all leather and darkness, and the closed space made her hyper-aware of him. His jaw was still tight with barely controlled rage, his knuckles bruised from the fight. She shouldn't find it attractive, this violence, but her body disagreed with spectacular enthusiasm. "You can't come back," he said suddenly, his voice rough. "It's too dangerous. I'll arrange a transfer somewhere safe and pay you." "No." The word burst out before wisdom could stop it. "I'm not leaving." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You saw what happened today. This is my world, Ambw. Blood and bullets and bodies. You don't belong in it." "Maybe not." She turned to face him, her heart in her throat. "But I'm staying anyway." Something snapped in his control. He pulled the car over abruptly, the tires screaming, and suddenly he was there, crowding into her space, his hand cupping her jaw with barely restrained force. "You have no idea what you're doing," he whispered harshly, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "No idea what I want to do to you." Her breath caught. "Then show me." The following morning everything changed. Jaewon was different, more intense, more present, his gaze tracking her every movement like she might disappear if he looked away. He found excuses to be near her, to brush against her in the hallway, to lean over her desk when reviewing documents until she could feel his breath on her neck. The tension between them became unbearable, thick enough to choke on. By the end of the week, the entire office whispered about them. She caught jealous stares from other women, warning looks from his security team, but Jaewon seemed oblivious to everything except her. He started working later, keeping her in the office long after everyone else left, the city lights glittering below them like fallen stars. "Tell me about yourself," he commanded one night, pouring expensive whiskey into crystal glasses. "Everything. Where you're from, what you dream about, what scares you." She should have maintained professional distance, but something about the darkness and his unexpected vulnerability made her honest. She told him about growing up in a small village, about losing her parents young, about fighting for every opportunity until she earned her scholarship to study in Korea, about feeling lost and alone in a country that still felt foreign despite her best efforts. He listened with an intensity that made her skin prickle, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he reached out and tucked a curl behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "I'll make sure of that." The next day, she discovered he'd paid off her student loans. All of them. The balance showing zero made her dizzy, and when she confronted him, furious and confused, he simply shrugged. "You needed help. I provided it. This doesn't have to mean anything." But it meant everything. She felt the weight of obligation pressing down, mixing with a dangerous attraction until she couldn't breathe properly around him. "I can't accept this," she protested weakly. "You already have." His smile was dark, knowing. "And Ambw, I always collect on my debts. A few days later, she met his world properly. A charity gala, the kind where Korea's elite gathered to pretend they cared about the poor while dripping in diamonds. Jae-won arrived at her apartment with a dress in his hands, black silk that would cling to every curve, expensive enough to feed a family for months. Wear this, he commanded. You're coming with me tonight. She shouldn't have agreed, but she was tired of fighting the current pulling her toward him. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her generous curves in ways that made her feel powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. When Jae-won saw her, something feral flashed across his face before he masked it with careful control. At the gala, he kept her close, his hand possessive on her lower back, guiding her through a crowd of beautiful people who looked at her with curiosity and barely concealed disdain. She felt their judgment, their whispered questions about who she was, where she came from, what she could possibly offer a man like Nam Jae-won. Then Park Min-ho appeared, another crime lord's son, handsome and charming, with a smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes. He took her hand without asking, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her skin crawl. You must be Jae-won's new secretary, he said, the pause loaded with insinuation. Such an unusual choice. Tell me, do your duties extend beyond office hours? Before she could respond, Jae-won was there, his hand clamping around Min-ho's wrist with enough force to make the other man's smile falter. Touch her again, Jae-won said softly, his voice Arctic death, and I'll remove your hands at the wrists, then your arms at the shoulders, then everything else piece by piece until there's nothing left to identify the body. The ballroom went silent. Min-ho paled, yanking his hand back, and Amarachi felt Jae-won's fury vibrating through his frame like earthquake tremors. He was jealous, possessively, violently jealous, and the realization sent conflicting waves of fear and dark arousal through her system. Later that night, back in his penthouse, the tension exploded. You smiled at him, Jae-won accused, pacing like a caged predator, his jacket discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar revealing smooth skin. Laughed at his pathetic jokes. I was being polite. She was angry now too, tired of his intensity, his jealousy, his refusal to admit what was happening between them. You don't own me, Jae-won. Despite what you think, despite the gifts and the protection and... He crowded her against the floor-to-ceiling windows, his hands bracketing her head, his body pressed against hers from chest to hip. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights bearing witness to whatever was about to break between them. Don't I? His voice was gravel and silk, dangerous promise. Then why does your body respond to me? Why do you tremble when I'm close? Why has no other man ever touched you? Her breath caught. How do you? I know everything about you, Amarachi. Every secret, every fear, every dream you've never spoken aloud. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her lower lip with aching gentleness that contradicted the fire in his eyes. I've wanted you since the moment you walked into my office pretending to be brave. Wanted to corrupt you, protect you, keep you, own you. This is wrong, she whispered, but her hands were fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed warnings. I know. His forehead pressed against hers, their breath mingling in the space between. I know and I don't care. Tell me to stop, Amarachi. Tell me you don't want this, and I'll walk away. I'll let you go, arrange a transfer, make sure you never have to see me again. You should say yes. Should run from this man who lived in darkness, who killed without remorse, who wanted to possess her in ways that would change everything. But her traitorous heart had other plans. I can't, she admitted brokenly. I can't tell you to stop. Something savage and triumphant flashed across his face. Then say yes. Yes. The word had barely left her lips before he was kissing her, and it wasn't gentle, wasn't soft, wasn't anything like the romance novels she'd secretly devoured as a teenager. This was claiming, consuming, a brand pressed against her soul. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head for deeper access, and she melted against him, gasping into his mouth as heat flooded her system. He walked her backward through the penthouse, never breaking the kiss, his hands roaming over her curves with reverent possession. The bedroom was all shadows and silk, expensive sheets that caught the city lights filtering through the windows. When he laid her down, hovering over her, she felt the full weight of what was about to happen crash over her. "I've never," she started, but he silenced her with another kiss, this one somehow tender despite the barely leashed hunger radiating from him. "I know," he murmured against her lips. "I'll take care of you. I'll always take care of you." The silk dress whispered as he removed it, his eyes dark with want as he took in every curve, every imperfection she'd always hated about herself. But under his gaze, she felt beautiful, desired, worshipped. His shirt joined her dress on the floor, revealing a body marked with scars, evidence of his violent life, proof that he'd survived things that should have killed him. She traced one scar across his ribs with trembling fingers. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." He caught her hand, pressed it against his chest where his heart thundered. "This is what hurts. Wanting you, needing you, knowing I'm damning you by doing this. Then we're damned together." What happened next existed beyond words, beyond description suitable for telling. It was possession and surrender, pain and pleasure, an ending and a beginning wrapped in gasps and trembling and his name falling from her lips like prayer. He was careful, reverent, guiding her through sensations she'd never imagined, until the world shattered into light and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in existence. Afterward, she lay against his chest, their hearts gradually slowing to normal rhythms, and felt the magnitude of what they'd done settle over her like weighted silk. She'd given him everything, her virginity, her trust, pieces of her soul she hadn't known existed. And the terrifying part was how right it felt, how complete, like she'd been half-formed her entire life until this moment. "Don't leave," he commanded softly, his arms tightening around her. "Stay here tonight. Stay with me." She wanted to believe this was more than physical, more than a powerful man claiming what he desired. But fear crept in as sleep pulled her under. Fear that morning would bring regret, that he would push her away now that he'd gotten what he wanted, that she'd become just another conquest in a long line of women who'd warmed his bed. The following morning, she woke alone. Panic seized her chest as she sat up, seeing the empty space beside her, the cold sheets where his warmth had been. Through the bedroom door, she heard voices. His security team maybe, or associates from his darker business. Shame flooded her system as she imagined them knowing what happened, judging her, laughing at the naive secretary who thought she meant something to their boss. She dressed quickly in last night's wrinkled dress, her body aching in unfamiliar ways, evidence of his possession marked on her skin in places no one else would see. She needed to leave before he returned, before she had to face the cold dismissal she knew was coming. Men like Ambw didn't keep women like her. They used them and moved on. But as she reached the penthouse door, it opened, and he was there, dressed for the office in another devastating suit. His hair still damp from the shower. His expression was unreadable as he took in her appearance, the way she clutched her purse like a shield. "Running." One word loaded with dangerous calm. "I should get home. Ain't. I'll be late for work." "You're not going anywhere." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, caging her against it with his presence. "Not until we talk." "There's nothing to talk about." She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't bear to see regret or indifference there. "We both know what this was. Understand. I'm not naive enough to." His hand caught her chin, forcing her gaze up to his, and what she saw there stole her breath. Not regret, not indifference. Raw, almost frightening intensity. "You understand nothing," he said harshly. "Last night changed everything. You're mine now, Amarachi. Not just my secretary, not just a woman I slept with. Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head, afraid to hope, afraid to believe. "It means I will kill anyone who threatens you. It means you don't leave my sight without security. It means every part of my life, my business, my world, is now dedicated to keeping you safe and making you happy." His thumb brushed over her lips, the gesture achingly tender. It means I'm claiming you publicly, permanently. And anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with the .40 caliber pistol in my desk drawer. Tears burned her eyes. You don't mean that. Can't. I'm nobody, just you're everything. The words were fierce, absolute. And I'm a selfish bastard who's going to keep you even though you deserve better. Even though being with me paints a target on your back. Even though my enemies will use you against me. His forehead pressed against hers. Faye, do mine. Let me protect you. You should say no. Should run from this beautiful, dangerous man who wanted to possess her completely. But her heart had already made its choice somewhere between his first kiss and the way he'd held her like she was precious. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. He kissed her then, deep and claiming a brand and a promise. When he finally pulled back, his thumb wiped away the tears on her cheeks. Good. Because I wasn't giving you a choice anyway. That afternoon everything changed at the office. J1 didn't hide their relationship. He announced it with calculated precision. His hand possessive on her waist as he introduced her as mine to shocked board members and seething rivals. She felt the shift in power dynamics, the way women who'd ignored her now watched with jealousy. The way men who'd been friendly suddenly kept their distance. By the end of the week, gifts appeared. Not just flowers now, but jewelry, designer clothes, a new laptop, a car waiting in the parking garage with her name on the registration. She protested each one, uncomfortable with the extravagance. But J1 simply smiled that dangerous smile and told her to get used to being spoiled. This is too much, she insisted one evening as he fastened a diamond necklace around her throat, the stones cold against her skin. This is nothing. His lips brushed her shoulder, making her shiver. I would give you the world if you asked. I would burn it down and rebuild it to your specifications. A few days later, danger struck again. She was leaving the office late, her new security detail shadowing her to the parking garage, when the lights went out. Gunshots echoed in the concrete space, and hands grabbed her from behind, dragging her toward a van with practiced efficiency. She screamed, fought, but they were trained professionals, and she was just a secretary who'd wandered into a war zone. The last thing she heard before a cloth pressed over her mouth and darkness claimed her was her security team's shouted warnings, cut short by the wet sound of bullets finding flesh. She woke in a warehouse, hands bound, head pounding, fear coating her tongue like copper. Men stood around her, speaking in rapid Korean, and though her language skills were improving, she caught enough to understand. Leverage, ransom, Nam Jae-won's weakness finally exposed. Park Min-ho stepped into view, that same charming smile now twisted with malice. Hello again, secretary. Let's see how much you're really worth to him, shall we? Meanwhile, across the city, Nam Jae-won transformed into something inhuman when he got the call. His security team found slaughtered, his woman taken. His control shattered into rage so pure it made grown men step back in fear. He made one phone call, his voice arctic calm despite the murder in his eyes. I want every resource, every contact, every favor owed. Find her. Now. Within the hour he had a location. Within 2, he'd assembled a small army. Men loyal to him. Men who understood that failure meant death. The warehouse where they held Amarachi became ground zero for a massacre, and Jae-won led the assault personally, moving through enemies like death incarnate. Amarachi heard the chaos before she saw it. Gunfire, screams, the wet sounds of violence in its purest form. Then the door exploded inward, and there he was, covered in blood that wasn't his. His eyes finding her with laser focus. He crossed to her in 3 strides, cutting her bonds with a knife that had clearly been used for darker purposes moments before. Did they touch you? His hands roamed over her frantically, checking for injuries. Did they hurt you? I'm okay. Her voice shook, but she was alive, whole. You came. Something almost like a laugh escaped him, harsh and disbelieving. I would have torn this city apart brick by brick to find you. Did you really think I'd let them keep you? He carried her out of the warehouse, ignoring the carnage left in his wake, the bodies that bore testament to his fury. His car waited outside, engine running, and he placed her in the back seat with surprising gentleness before climbing in beside her. The moment the door closed, he pulled her into his lap, his arms crushing her against his chest. "Never again," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "Never again will I let you out of my sight. Never again will I allow anyone to threaten what's mine." She clung to him, feeling the tremors running through his powerful frame, understanding that his fear for her had been just as devastating as her terror. "I'm sorry," she gasped out. "I'm so sorry. Don't." His hand fisted in her hair, pulling her head back so he could look into her eyes. "Don't apologize for being targeted because of me. This is my fault, my world, my enemies. But I swear to you, Amarachi, I will burn down every rival family, every threat, every person who even looks at you wrong. You're under my protection now, and that means something in this world." Later that night, back in his penthouse, she discovered just how deep his possessive streak ran. He drew her a bath, his hands gentle as he washed away the dirt and fear, but his eyes never left her face. When she was clean and wrapped in one of his shirts, he carried her to bed and simply held her, his body wrapped around hers like a living shield. "I can't lose you," he confessed into the darkness, his voice raw in a way she'd never heard. "I know I'm selfish, I know I'm damning you by keeping you close, but I can't let you go. You've become the only soft thing in my life, the only person who looks at me like I'm more than the monster everyone fears." She turned in his arms, cupping his face, seeing past the ruthless mafia boss to the man underneath, the one who'd been raised in violence, who'd lost everyone he ever loved, who'd built walls so high around his heart that nothing could penetrate. Until her. "Then don't let me go," she whispered. "Keep me. Protect me. Love me if you can." "If I can." His laugh was harsh. "Amarachi, I've been half in love with you since you walked into my office refusing to be intimidated. I've been fully, irrevocably, dangerously in love with you since the moment you agreed to stay despite knowing what I am. This isn't a choice anymore. You're mine and I'm yours, and anyone who tries to come between us will learn exactly how ruthless I can be." The following morning, he made good on his promise. By noon, 3 rival families had been dismantled, their operations shut down, their leaders arrested or disappeared. The message was clear. Nam Jae-won's woman was untouchable, and the price for forgetting that was extinction. Amarachi watched him work from the safety of his office, seeing the cold efficiency with which he demolished obstacles, and understood that she'd fallen in love with a man who would quite literally burn the world down for her. It should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life. By the end of the week, a new normal emerged. She moved into his penthouse officially, her small apartment left behind like a chrysalis she'd outgrown. He showered her with attention and gifts, learning everything about her. Her favorite foods, her secret love for romance novels, the way she liked her coffee, the songs that made her cry. In return, she learned his scars, both physical and emotional, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m., the guilt he carried for lives he'd taken and couldn't save. The next few weeks passed in a blur of dangerous normalcy. Amarachi adapted to her new life with surprising ease, though the armed guards following her everywhere took getting used to. Jae-won was insatiable in his need to be near her. Video calls throughout the day, surprise visits to bring her lunch, evenings spent wrapped around each other as if separation might kill them both. But paradise in the underworld never lasted long. 1 month after the warehouse incident, she started feeling off. Nausea in the mornings, exhaustion that dragged at her bones, a sensitivity to smells that made the office coffee unbearable. She dismissed it as stress, the trauma of kidnapping catching up to her body, until her period was 2 weeks late and denial became impossible. The pregnancy test she took in the penthouse bathroom showed positive before she'd even finished waiting the required 3 minutes. She stared at those 2 pink lines with her heart in her throat, terror and joy warring in her chest. Baby. One's baby. Growing inside her body, a consequence of that first night when he'd claimed her so thoroughly. She should tell him immediately. But fear paralyzed her. Fear that he'd see this as a trap, that the possessive love he showed would evaporate in the face of such permanent responsibility, that he'd think she'd planned this to secure her position in his life. Men like him didn't want complications, didn't want ties that bound them to consequences. So she hid it. Hid the nausea behind claims of food poisoning, the exhaustion behind late nights at work, the emotional volatility behind stress. She told herself she'd wait for the right moment. When things were calmer, when his business wasn't demanding his attention 20 hours a day. Later that week, J1 announced they were attending another gala, this one hosted by the governor, a political figure with deep connections to both legitimate business and the underworld. Amarachi wore emerald silk that she prayed hid her slightly fuller breasts, diamond earrings that J1 had surprised her with that morning, and a smile that felt fragile as glass. At the event, she met J1's world in its full, terrifying complexity. Politicians who smiled while making deals with criminals, businessmen who laundered money through legitimate corporations, women who looked at her with barely concealed contempt for being an outsider who'd somehow captured the most dangerous man in the room. Then she met Yoon Mi-sun, J1's ex-fiancée, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Korean drama with her perfect features, designer gown, and family connections that made her the ideal match for a man in his position. Mi-sun approached with a champagne flute and a smile sharp as knives. "So you're the secretary everyone's talking about," Mi-sun said in flawless English, her eyes cataloging every flaw in Amarachi's appearance. How unexpected. I wouldn't have thought J1's tastes ran to such exotic choices. The word exotic landed like a slap, loaded with racist implications that made Amarachi's jaw tighten. Before she could respond, J1 materialized beside her, his hand possessive on her waist, his eyes cold as he regarded his ex-fiancée. "Mi-sun, I see your manners haven't improved since we ended things." His voice could have frozen fire. Amarachi is not a choice, not a phase, not a temporary distraction. It is mine. Permanently. So unless you want to explain to your father why his business relationship with Nam Corporation just evaporated, I suggest you walk away. Mi-sun's perfect smile cracked. You can't be serious. She's a nobody, Jiwon. No family, no connections, no value except what's between her. Finish that sentence. J1 interrupted softly, dangerously, and I will ruin your entire bloodline before morning. Try me. The other woman paled and retreated, but the damage was done. Amarachi felt the weight of judgment from everyone who'd witnessed the exchange, understanding that she would never truly belong in this world. She was too different, too foreign, too much of an outsider who'd stumbled into a life she wasn't bred for. That evening, back at the penthouse, she finally cracked. Maybe she's right, she said quietly, staring out at the city lights. Maybe I don't belong here. In your world. With you. J1 went very still behind her. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we made a mistake. The words tasted like ash. Maybe this was just physical, just chemistry, and now reality is setting in. You could have anyone, J1. Someone who fits, who understands your world, who won't be an embarrassment at events or a weakness your enemies can exploit. He crossed to her in 2 strides, spinning her to face him, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely restrained force. Are you breaking up with me? His voice was lethal calm, but his eyes blazed with something close to panic. Is that what's happening right now? Tears burned her throat. I'm trying to give you an out. Before this gets more complicated. Before we're in too deep. Too deep. He laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. Amarachi, I'm so far gone for you that I can't see the surface anymore. You think I care what Yoon Mi-sun or anyone else thinks? You think their opinions matter more than the fact that you're the only person in this entire city who looks at me and sees something worth loving? You don't love me, she whispered, even as her heart screamed otherwise. You can't. We barely know each other. This is just what? Obsession. Possession. Addiction. He cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. Fine. Call it whatever you want. But I know what I feel, and I know I would rather die than let you go. So whatever doubts are eating at you, whatever fears me son planted in your head, we're going to work through them. Together. Because leaving is not an option I'm willing to consider. She broke then, the tears finally falling, her hands fisting in his shirt as weeks of fear and stress poured out. I'm pregnant, she sobbed against his chest. I'm pregnant and I'm terrified, and I didn't know how to tell you because I thought you'd think I trapped you, and I can't lose you, J1, I can't. He went utterly still. For a heartbeat, 2, 3, she felt his shock radiating through his frame. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against him, and she heard his shaky exhale against her hair. Pregnant, he repeated. His voice raw with emotion she couldn't name. You're carrying my child. I'm sorry, she gasped. I know this complicates everything. I know you probably didn't want. Sorry. He pulled back and his face was transformed, wonder and fierce joy mixing with something almost like fear. You're apologizing for giving me the one thing I never thought I'd have? For creating life with me? For making me more than just a killer with blood on his hands? His hand moved to her still flat stomach, pressing there with reverent gentleness. There's a baby in here. Baby. Half you, half me. Proof that something good can come from my darkness. His eyes met hers, wet with unshed tears. I'm terrified too. Terrified I'll fail, that I'll make the same mistakes my father made, that my world will hurt this child before they even take their first breath. But Amarachi, I want this. Want you. Want our family more than I've wanted anything in my entire life. Relief crashed over her in waves so intense she could barely stand. Really? You're not angry. Angry. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle kisses that tasted like salt and promise. I'm grateful, humbled, absolutely terrified, and so deeply in love with you that it physically hurts. We're going to do this, all of it. I'm going to marry you, protect you, give our child a life free from the violence that raised me. Marry me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside sat a ring that caught the light and shattered it into rainbows, a flawless diamond surrounded by emeralds, clearly custom-made, clearly expensive enough to fund a small country. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, he admitted. Waiting for the perfect moment. But there's no perfect moment with us, is there? Just this, messy and complicated and absolutely right. He dropped to one knee, this dangerous man who knelt for no one, and looked up at her with his heart in his eyes. Amarachi, you walked into my life and changed everything. You made me want to be better, to protect instead of destroy, to build something lasting instead of just surviving day by day. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you didn't make a mistake choosing me. Let me give our child a father who will burn down the world to keep them safe. Yes. The word burst out through her tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, lifting her into his arms, spinning her in a circle despite her laughing protests about dizziness. When he set her down, he kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache, his hand never leaving her stomach where their child grew. The following morning, he announced their engagement to the entire organization. Not a request for approval, not a discussion, a declaration of fact delivered with the absolute authority of a man who bowed to no one. Anyone who had a problem with his choice could leave or die. He was refreshingly clear on those options. By the end of the week, wedding plans were underway. J1 wanted something immediate, a private ceremony, just them and a few trusted witnesses, before her pregnancy started showing and people could do the math. Amarachi didn't care about the details as long as she ended up his wife, so she let him handle arrangements while she navigated morning sickness and the surreal reality of her transformed life. A few days later, danger returned with a vengeance. Intelligence reached J1 that Park Min-ho, still bitter about the warehouse humiliation and subsequent loss of power, was planning something catastrophic. A final play, a desperate gamble to destroy Nam J1 by destroying what he loved most. J1 immediately tripled Amarachi's security, moved her to a safe house on the outskirts of Seoul, and began systematically dismantling Min-ho's remaining operations. But Min-ho had one advantage. He was willing to die if it meant taking his enemy down with him, and that made him unpredictable, dangerous in ways even Jae-won couldn't fully control. The attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. Amarachi was in the safe house with 4 bodyguards when explosives detonated on the lower floor, the blast shaking the entire structure. Smoke filled the hallways, alarms screaming, and through the chaos, she heard gunfire, shouts, the wet sounds of bodies hitting the floor. Her security team rushed her toward the panic room, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. She watched 2 of them fall protecting her, their blood spraying across walls as they gave their lives to buy her seconds. The remaining guards shoved her into the panic room, sealing the reinforced door just as more gunfire erupted. Then silence. Terrible, suffocating silence broken only by her ragged breathing and the pounding of her heart. She had no phone. Protocol demanded leaving everything electronic outside to avoid tracking. No weapon. No way to know if Jae-won even knew what was happening. She pressed her hand to her stomach, to the tiny life growing there, and prayed to any god listening. Please, she whispered. Please let him come. Please don't let our baby grow up without a father. Across the city, Jae-won received the alert and transformed into something inhuman. His security chief barely got 3 words out before Jae-won was moving, grabbing weapons, issuing orders in a voice so cold it made veteran killers flinch. He assembled his best team, the men who'd been with him longest, who understood that failure meant they'd beg for death before he was done with them. The drive to the safe house took 12 minutes. Felt like 12 years. His mind supplied him with devastating images. Amarachi hurt, bleeding, their baby lost before they'd even had a chance to meet them. He forced the thoughts away, channeling everything into cold fury, the mindset that had kept him alive through countless battles. The safe house was a war zone when he arrived. Bodies everywhere, walls scorched from explosives, the smell of blood and gunpowder thick in the air. His team fanned out, clearing rooms with military precision, while Jae-won made straight for the panic room. The door was still sealed. That was good. That meant she was alive, protected, waiting for him. He entered the access code with shaking fingers, and when the door hissed open, he found her huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror but whole, alive, still his. Amarachi. Her name left his lips like a prayer. She looked up, and relief crashed across her face so intensely it was almost painful to witness. Jae-won. Then she was in his arms, sobbing against his chest, her hands clutching his jacket like she'd never let go. He held her, checking for injuries, cataloging every visible inch to confirm she was truly unharmed. "I'm here," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now. Our baby is safe." "They killed them," she gasped out. "Your men, they died protecting me, and I couldn't do anything, I just hid while they did their job." His voice was gentle despite the rage still burning through him. "They protected what matters most to me. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain. But Amarachi, this ends now. Today, I'm going to end Park Min-ho's entire existence, and anyone who stood with him will learn exactly what happens when you threaten my family." That evening, Jae-won declared war. Not the careful, strategic maneuvering of rival crime families, but total, scorched earth warfare. He called in every favor, activated every alliance, and within 48 hours, Park Min-ho's organization ceased to exist. His properties burned, his accounts emptied, his allies arrested or killed. His family's reputation destroyed so thoroughly that their name became synonymous with failure and death. Min-ho himself was found 3 days later in an abandoned warehouse, the same warehouse where Amarachi had been held months before. Jae-won delivered justice personally, and though the details never reached Amarachi's ears, the entire underworld understood the message. Jae-won's mercy had limits, and crossing them meant extinction. With the threat eliminated, Jae-won moved up the wedding. No more waiting, no more delays. They married in a private ceremony at his family's ancestral estate, Just them, a handful of trusted guards, and an officiant who'd been paid enough to forget he'd ever been there. Ambw wore simple white silk that accommodated her slightly curved belly, flowers in her hair, and tears of joy streaming down her face. Jae-won wore a traditional Korean suit, his hair styled back, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him. When the officiant pronounced them married, he kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget they were surrounded by armed men, forget that their love had been forged in violence and danger, forget everything except the certainty that this was right, that they were meant for exactly this. The following months passed in a protective bubble. Jae-won became almost obsessive about her safety and health, accompanying her to every doctor's appointment, reading pregnancy books late into the night, preparing the nursery himself with a meticulousness that would have been amusing if it wasn't so touching. He spoke to her growing belly constantly, promising their daughter. They'd learned it was a girl at the 20-week scan, that he would be better than his father, that he would protect her from the darkness, that she would know love from her first breath. Ambw watched him transform from feared Mafia Boss to devoted father-to-be, and fell more in love with him every day. He still ran his empire, still made the hard decisions, still had blood on his hands, but with her and their unborn child, he was gentle, patient, almost vulnerable in his desire to do everything right. 7 months into her pregnancy, complications arose. Preeclampsia, the doctor said, monitoring her blood pressure with worried frowns. She needed bed rest, constant supervision, possibly early delivery if things worsened. Jae-won moved his entire operation into the penthouse, refusing to leave her side, conducting business from beside her bed while his hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. "You should go to the office," she protested weakly during one particularly boring afternoon. "I'm fine, the doctors are checking me constantly. I'm not leaving you." His voice was absolute. "Not for work, not for business, not for anything. You and our daughter are my priority. The empire can run itself for a few weeks." At 35 weeks, her water broke unexpectedly in the middle of the night. The rush to the hospital was controlled chaos, Jae-won carrying her to the car personally. His security team blocking traffic, the hospital staff jumping to attention the moment they arrived. Money and power bought the best doctors, the best equipment, a private floor where no one could threaten them. Labor was long, painful, terrifying. Ambw had read all the books, taken all the classes, but nothing prepared her for the reality of bringing life into the world. Jae-won stayed beside her through all of it, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, looking almost as terrified as she felt when complications arose and doctors rushed around with urgent voices. But then a cry. Their daughter's first scream, angry and alive and perfect. The doctor placed her on Ambw's chest. This tiny, wrinkled creature with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be her father's obsidian. Jae-won leaned over them both, his expression absolutely wrecked, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he touched their daughter's tiny hand with one finger. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're both perfect. My girls. My family." They named her Jiwoo, wisdom and beauty in Korean. Ambw added her own middle name, making her Jiwoo Ambw Nam, a bridge between both their cultures. The baby was healthy despite the early arrival, and after 2 days of monitoring, they were cleared to go home. The penthouse transformed into a fortress dedicated to protecting one tiny life. Jae-won was hands-on to a degree that surprised everyone. Changing diapers, handling night feedings, walking the floors at 3 a.m. when Jiwoo refused to sleep. He'd built his empire on violence and fear, but with his daughter, he was gentle as starlight. Ambw watched him fall completely in love with their child, and understood that this was what breaking cycles looked like. Jae-woo's father had been cold, brutal, teaching his son that emotion was weakness. But Jae-won held Jiwoo like she was made of spun glass and whispered promises that he would never let the darkness touch her, that she could be anything she wanted, that his love was unconditional and eternal. 3 months after Jiwoo's birth, Jae-won made a decision that shocked his entire organization. He announced he was stepping back from the day-to-day criminal operations, transitioning Nam Corporation into fully legitimate business. It would take years, he admitted, but he refused to risk his daughter growing up with a father in prison or dead from a rival's bullet. "You're really doing this?" Amarachi asked one evening, watching him hold Ji-woo while reviewing legal contracts. "Leaving that world behind. I have to." He looked up from their daughter's sleeping face, his expression serious. "She deserves better than having her childhood marked by violence." "You both do. I've spent my whole life building an empire of fear, but what's the point if I lose everything that matters? I'd rather be a legitimate businessman who gets to see his daughter grow up than a powerful crime lord who dies before she learns to walk." The transition was difficult, dangerous. Not everyone in his organization agreed with the decision, and Jae-won had to deal with challenges to his authority, attempts at coups, threats from those who wanted to maintain the criminal status quo. But he was ruthless in his transformation, cutting ties with anyone who couldn't adapt, using his power to ensure the transition happened with minimal bloodshed. 1 year after Ji-woo's birth, Nam Corporation was 90% legitimate. Tech investments, real estate, entertainment ventures. The remaining 10% was being carefully dismantled, and Jae-won had made it clear that within 2 years, he wanted nothing illegal tied to his family name. On Ji-woo's first birthday, they threw a small party. Just family, which now included some of Jae-won's trusted associates who'd become honorary uncles, and a few of Amarachi's friends from the expat community. The penthouse filled with laughter, baby giggles, the kind of normalcy neither of them had ever expected to experience. That evening, after everyone left and Ji-woo was asleep in her crib, Jae-won pulled Amarachi onto the balcony overlooking Seoul. The city glittered below them like fallen stars, the same view they'd had that first night he'd kissed her, but everything had changed since then. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small box. "More jewelry." She laughed, looking at the wedding rings and anniversary gifts already adorning her fingers. "Jae-won, you've given me enough. Not jewelry." He opened the box, revealing a key. "This is to a house. Outside the city, near the mountains. Private, secure, with a garden for Ji-woo to play in when she's older. I bought it 6 months ago but wanted to finish renovations before telling you." Tears burned her eyes. "A house. For us. A home," he corrected gently. "Somewhere without the memories of violence. Somewhere we can raise our daughter without security teams in every corner. Somewhere normal. Well, as normal as we can manage." His smile was self-deprecating. "I know I'll never be a regular father, never fully escape what I've done, but I can give you both something better than this." He gestured at the penthouse, at the city that represented his criminal empire. She threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by this man who'd started as her dangerous, obsessive boss and become the love of her life, the father of her child, her partner in building something better from the ashes of his dark past. "I love you," she whispered fiercely. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you more." He held her tight, his chin resting on her head. "You saved me, Amarachi. Gave me a reason to be more than the monster I was becoming. Our daughter, our family, this life we're building. It's all because you were brave enough to stay when anyone sensible would have run." 2 years later, they moved into the house permanently. Jae-won still maintained his business interests, still traveled to Seoul for meetings, but home was the mountains, the garden, Ji-woo's laughter echoing through rooms filled with light and love. Amarachi finished her degree, started working as a translator from home, found fulfillment in building her own career while raising their daughter. And on quiet evenings when Ji-woo was asleep and they sat together on the porch watching stars emerge, Amarachi would remember that first night. The fear, the intensity, the impossible moment when a mafia boss had looked at his secretary and decided she was worth changing his entire life for. It hadn't been safe, hadn't been sensible, hadn't followed any logical path. But it had been real and fierce and transformative. Their love had been forged in danger, tested by violence, tempered by fear and loss and impossible choices. But it had survived, grown, become something beautiful enough to build a family on. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one night, her head on his shoulder. "Giving up that power, that life?" "Never." His answer was immediate, absolute. I thought power was everything until I had love. Thought control mattered until I held my daughter. You and Jiwoo are worth more than 1,000 criminal empires. You're my redemption, my second chance, my proof that even someone like me can deserve something good. She kissed him then, soft and deep, tasting promise and permanence. Behind them, through the window, Jiwoo slept peacefully in her room, safe and loved and blissfully unaware of the darkness her parents had walked through to give her light. And somewhere in Seoul, in the boardrooms and back alleys, people still whispered about Nam Jae-won, the crime lord who'd walked away from everything for love, the man who'd proven that even the most dangerous heart could be tamed by the right woman, the legend who'd chosen family over fear and built something lasting from the ruins of his violent past. Thank you for watching this dark romance journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to Afrokorea TV for more emotional, intense love stories. Red Heart.